A renter mob of pro-Palestinian supporters tried to storm the Royal Society of Arts today in protest at an event it was holding, which was led by the father of a boy murdered by Hamas. Tom Mummery was among those protesting outside the embassy. He said he is a member of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign and he appeared to show sympathy with Hamas.
If I was a Palestinian, then I wouldn't... If I was Palestinian and I was treated the way the Israelis treat Palestinians, I would be more surprised if something like October the 7th didn't happen. It was inevitable. It wasn't a case of if, it was a case of when. How can you not?
Well, the event he was protesting outside was organised by former Israeli Science and Technology Minister Izhar Shay. His project is called Next October, which promotes investing in innovative startups in Israel, and he explained why he was personally motivated to set up Next October.
My son, Yaron Ori, was a soldier in the Israeli army. He was in charge, his unit was in charge of keeping the peace. Again, keeping the peace on the Gaza border, and they were stationed there on October 7th. My son fell in action. He was killed that day in a heroic battle against many, many terrorists.
But Izhar wasn't convinced that protesters like Tom know actually what they're supporting.
I wonder why these demonstrators here are making a point to come here into an economic conference that deals with bringing innovation and doing good to the world. This is just ridiculous and shows the hypocrisy and maybe misunderstanding of innocent people here who just have no idea about what is going on out there and how cruel the people they are demonstrating for have acted and still are advocating in terms of what they want to do, had we not been able to protect ourselves.
To discuss this alarming rise in anti-Semitism, which is still going on, we're going to talk to Jonathan Sacerdoti right now. Jonathan, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us. I mean, I've been still quite shocked at the extent to which people have sympathy for what happened to what Hamas did. They have sympathy for what Hamas did on October the 7th, that terrible, terrible atrocity that they committed, and how they've sort of turned the hostage-taking into something which people really don't discuss anymore, that there are still hostages inside Gaza, the fact that young men, British men like that, can go and demonstrate and say he's not surprised that it happened. I mean, I find it staggering. I mean, you're probably going to say to me now, well, you shouldn't find it staggering, but I still do. I can't quite believe that in Britain and in America, a country that I spend a lot of time in, has this problem.
Well, it was really weird hearing what he had just there. It wasn't a question of if, it was a question of when.
Yeah.
And he could understand why. So it's because of whatever he thinks is going on with the Palestinians, it was a question of when thousands of people would rape, butcher, kidnap and kill people because they were Jewish, and plenty who weren't. I think that's a really strange distortion of morality. And I think actually what we're seeing at the moment in a lot of this support that claims to be for Palestinians is people who are, like that man seemed to be, actually quite sympathetic towards anti-Semitic terrorists.
Yes.
And I think that's really the problem. But what's definitely interesting as well is that that isn't restricted to Gaza and the Gaza borders in Israel. We have plenty of it here, I'm afraid to say. So when we saw people being butchered and killed, and even hear these horrific eyewitness accounts of rape and gang rape and sexual assault as well that took place on the 7th of October in Israel, we only need to think back a couple of years to when we saw cars driving through the streets of London covered in Palestinian flags with megaphones shouting, F the Jews, rape their mothers, rape their daughters.
Right.
What I think we need to realise is that this threat, this psychopathic threat, isn't one that just exists on the border of Gaza. It exists all around the world, and we need to take people seriously when they say things like that.
Oh, I think so. And unfortunately, both the Metropolitan Police, who have been kind of raked over the coals several times for their inability to sort of control some of the things that go on when these Palestinian marches go through London, they've been very lax about all of this. And we know from their previous history in all sorts of areas that they're very frightened and very nervous of being accused of being racist, very frightened of Muslim authority, very frightened of the Muslim sort of advisors that they seem to have brought inside the organisation. They've had to kick some of them out because they've realised that some of them are actually rather extreme. But there does seem to be this very thin line. Piers Morgan has many guests on his show who will not condemn the Hamas attacks on October the 7th without some kind of equivocation. You know, they won't just say, yes, that was disgusting, it should never have happened, Hamas should be done away with. They won't say it if they're from the pro-Palestinian cause.
Well, it's become one of the Piers Morgan litmus tests,
Yeah.
I've noticed. He has some pretty horrific characters on
does.
his programme.
Yeah.
And he will say that it's because it's called Uncensored and you have
Yeah.
people from both sides, extreme views from both sides. And actually, I think he's been doing a brilliant job of airing
I
all
think
those
he
things.
has, because I think we need to see these people out in the open, particularly the one he had on this week, who was an NHS doctor.
Well, I mean, just imagine seeing that doctor who he was heard to have said this was a punch on the nose for Jews,
Yeah.
a deserved punch on the nose, what happened on the 7th of October in Israel. He had some pretty awful other things to say. He wouldn't contradict that thing about gay people that one of his colleagues in his organisation had said. Imagine going to a doctor knowing they've said those things. Of course, doctors are allowed to have opinions.
Yeah.
Doctors are allowed to have political views, even ones you and I might disagree with.
Yeah.
But when they go on television and start sharing them, you do have to wonder how their patients are going to feel, or their trainees.
And I think also, you know, we have these conversations a lot on this station about, you know, free speech and the ability to say the things that you believe in, whether they might be abhorrent or not. That's all very well, and I agree with that. However, if you are doing a job like an NHS doctor's job, surely there's a code of practice which would suggest that, you know, there are some opinions that if you have them, you should either keep them to yourself or you shouldn't be working in the NHS. If you don't feel like you can treat Jewish people and gay people in the same way as you treat everybody else, then you've got no business working in the public sector, have you?
Well, I think some of them might say, and that doctor might have said, that he will treat them as he will treat all other patients. But I can certainly tell you, as a Jewish person, as a gay person, I wouldn't want to go to a doctor I'd heard saying that, even if I thought he was able to treat me the same medically.
Exactly right. And he could say, until he's blue in the face, that he's treating you equally. But, you know, what guarantee does he give you for that?
And beyond that, I think what you said earlier about the police is very interesting, because I think what many Jewish people and non-Jewish people are starting to think about how policing goes on in the UK is that their focus is on maintaining peace and community cohesion. Their focus is on trying to keep everyone calm. So we've seen some really weird things happening, like when we saw the police telling that guy to put away his England flag because it might upset the mob who were there with Palestinian flags. So waving the flag of England in England was something they shut down. We've seen similar things when the police got some ad vans which were showing pictures of the hostages being held in Gaza, got them to switch them off because they said it might inflame some kind of problem with the pro-Palestinian marchers. And now we've seen, also in the last few days, that there was a billboard company with electronic billboards. They have gone back on a contract, a 2-week contract, from the charity that was trying to raise awareness of the hostages being held in Gaza still, over 130 of them, I think. Those ads were dropped. And they said, I spoke to their representative this week, they said that was because there had been threats of violence made, and the police had got in touch and effectively recommended they pull the ads. So legal ads, free speech about a humanitarian cause, non-political, not paid for by a state, and they've pulled them down at the advice of the police because the police are trying to keep peace. Effectively, they're protecting the thugs and the violent, intimidating bullies, not the people who are trying to raise awareness of those being kept hostage.
Isn't it? Because, you know, we've got statistics that show something like 80% of Jewish people in Britain feel less safe than they did. We know that anti-Semitic incidents of hate crime are either by violence or by speech are up thousands of percentage points. And yet, it's almost as though the people who are kind of behind the pro-Palestinian movements are quite left-wing, quite woke, and they've sort of turned this into a sort of social justice campaign, and they've somehow convinced themselves and each other that Israel's bad and Palestine's good. And I mean, it's clearly far more nuanced than that to begin with. And also, as I always point out, well, there's only one state in that part of the world which has a properly elected government, and that's Israel. And if you look at the map, all you see is this tiny little dot in a sea of massive Arab nations, none of whom, by the way, want the Palestinians.
Well, and, you know, it's not a football match. I always have a problem when people say, you know, I'm supporting Palestine, I'm supporting Israel. Effectively, we're all supporting all of humanity, trying to create a peaceful situation for people to be able to live in their homeland where they want to in safety and security. I think that what you mentioned about the anti-Semitism statistics is also important because that's closer to home. There was that Survation poll carried out by the polling company Survation. They said 77% of British Jews feel less safe than before the 7th of October. It's a massive number. 87% have said that anti-Semitism has grown in the last 5 years. 67% of that said that it increased a lot. And I think we understand why. They were also asked about how much they trust institutions like the BBC, how much they trust university authorities in the UK. You know, 62% trust the BBC less.
Yeah.
57% trust university administrations less. 48% trust the police less. And why?
Right.
I think we know why. The BBC had Jeremy Bowen claiming that the Israelis had flattened a hospital.
Yeah.
When it came out that actually Palestinian Islamic Jihad had made a crater in the car park, he was on another programme on the BBC defending it. He said, I don't regret anything about my reporting.
Incredible.
In the same programme that he said, oh, I got that wrong.
Yeah.
Well, as a journalist, if I got something wrong, it can happen to all of us, I would apologise for it.
Well, you wouldn't say I don't regret it,
I do regret it.
Right.
Exactly. Even if it were justifiable, which it wasn't. John Donaldson made the same mistake on the BBC, alleging that Israel had done it when the leading lawyer, Natasha Hausdorff, was waiting to go on as a guest and had advised them not to say that. I think there's a whole barrage of things that BBC have got wrong.
And the BBC have been horrendous during this whole period.
Absolutely. And you know, I think that statistic there, 62% of British Jews trust the BBC less than before the 7th of October. The BBC I often hear this from BBC responses, because I've done a bit of reporting in my time on BBC bias, particularly in the BBC's Arabic programming.
Yes.
And I think something like
that was really bad as well.
Something like 6 of the presenters on BBC Arabic were found to have tweeted and said things in their own private accounts after October the 7th, which were seen as supportive or problematic towards Hamas.
Yes.
They will always say, oh, well, we get complaints from this side, we get complaints from that side, it means we're doing something right. I would say your aim should be not to get complaints from this side or from that side. If you're getting everybody angry and you're making everybody feeling like you're doing a bad job, chances are probably doing a bad job.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I've heard that excuse before from the BBC, and I'm sorry, it doesn't wash. You know, that is not by any means a model.
Your aim shouldn't be
no, exactly right.
to annoy everybody.
But also, did they not also say to their staff that they shouldn't go on the march against anti-Semitism, which took place a couple of Sundays ago, and some of them were just like, well, we're going anyway. And also, we hear a lot now from BBC employees who are Jewish that they don't feel very sort of comfortable working at the BBC. But Jonathan, listen, we could talk about this all night, I'm sure, but we must dash. Great to see you. Thank you for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
And we've got much more of this, I'm sure, to discuss, so we'll do it some more